What might be the relationship with the Department of Justice opening an investigation on Renee Good and NSPM-7, a national security presidential memorandum that some but not enough people know about? So Tom, Joscelyn, and I are going to try to break that down for you. And Tom, maybe let's just start with the first major events that occurred right after the incident in which the ICE agent had shot and killed Miss Good. And I thought maybe the best way to start is by doing the very timeline that Jake Tapper used in his interview with Secretary Noem this weekend. So he said the incident occurred, the shooting, at 10:37 a.m. Eastern. Within 2 hours, DHS released a statement with a definitive account as to what occurred and labeling Renee Good a domestic terrorist or engaging in domestic terrorism, and that within half an hour, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, in a press conference, reiterated this accusation of tying Renee Good to conduct of a domestic terrorist. So that didn't exactly come totally out of the blue. You and I have discussed this, so we wanted to just kind of have this as a kind of a public discussion. Where do you think that came from? What's the greater context for people to understand just from that first starting point of this label of domestic terrorism coming out of the mouth of a cabinet member?
So I think, we're going to tie this to National Security Presidential Memorandum-7 in a minute, but let's back up for 1 second. So let's go back to September 10th of this year when Charlie Kirk, the conservative activist, was murdered by an assassin. Horrific death. I don't know anybody who cheered that on. I don't know anybody who approves of that. I think that there's a broad swath of the American public, left to right, that disapproves of political violence. I think polling shows that. I certainly watched that video twice and thought it was horrific, and obviously no one that I know condones that. What happened right after that was the administration, in particular, Vice President J.D. Vance, Deputy White House Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, and others immediately started trying to say that the Kirk murder was the result of this broad, deep left-wing terror network, and that there were non-governmental organizations behind this and fomenting terrorism, and that there was this deep domestic terror network that they needed to uproot. And Stephen Miller vowed right after Kirk's death that he was going to use the power of the federal government to dismantle, quote unquote, these terror networks.
We are going to channel all of the anger that we have over the organized campaign that led to this assassination to uproot and dismantle these terrorist networks.
Here's the thing about it before we move on. To this day, no one has been charged in Kirk's murder other than the young man who shot him and killed him. They have not produced any evidence of any network behind this event whatsoever. They haven't connected this even to any kind of identifiable ideological movement. The shooter had sort of a jumble of beliefs. But even be that as it may, they certainly have not shown that there was any kind of like cohesive organization behind what happened there. That didn't stop them from moving forward with their plans to enshrine this idea that there was this domestic network on American soil that needed to be dismantled. So flash forward here, a couple weeks later, first thing the administration does, they designate Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization. A couple problems with that. Antifa is very hard to define. It's amorphous. It's not a real organization as far as we could tell. There's no cohesive leadership, certainly not nationwide. But the bigger problem was that through the years, as someone who studied terrorism and extremism for a long time, the U.S. government was always very careful not to maintain an official list of domestic terrorist organizations or say they were designating as such because there are obvious First Amendment concerns, right? This becomes a slippery slope when you go down this path. But so even though this designation lacked any kind of legal teeth, it showed that they were willing to violate those First Amendment concerns. They didn't care about it. They were going to move forward. And so move forward a little bit further. And what the administration does is they release National Security Presidential Memorandum-7. NSPM-7. Now, just by the number, you know how rare national security presidential memorandums are, right? There are only 6 before this in the first year of the Trump administration. Some of them remain hidden from public view. This one was put out very publicly. And this is a highly problematic document. What they were trying to do was trying to say that opposition to the administration on any number of fronts was this indicia of political violence. In other words, that if you held these beliefs, that was somehow indicative that you were more likely to commit political violence. Before we delve into that a little bit more, conspicuously absent from this document was any mention of the First Amendment, right? So the U.S. government has always, when they talk about domestic terrorism and FBI statements, Department of Homeland Security statements to Congress, they always have a clause or a caveat. First Amendment activities protected. We can't cross that line. That's not a basis for opening an investigation just based on speech alone, right? A criminal investigation. There are none of those safeguards in NSPM-7, none of them. Instead, what it is it says that there are these indicia that law enforcement, joint terrorism task forces around the country, and others should be on the lookout for that indicate somebody's going to be more likely to commit political violence. And Ryan, you and I were talking about one paragraph in particular. Maybe we should just read a little bit of it for viewers, if you want, to talk about what's in there and why this connects to Renee Good. Because what they say in there, and just give you a couple sentences real quick, and we can dissect it piece by piece if we want. But they say in this NSPM-7, there are common recurrent motivations and indicia uniting this pattern of violent and terrorist activities under the umbrella of self-described quote-unquote anti-fascism. These movements portray foundational American principles, e.g. support for law enforcement and border control, as quote-unquote fascists to justify and encourage acts of violent revolution. That's saying a lot in those 2 sentences, right? A lot, right? The first thing is that a lot of people describe themselves as anti-fascist and they don't have any inclination toward committing political violence whatsoever. In fact, that phrase, that term, has been used by Americans going back to prior to World War II. Defining these movements portray foundational American principles, including support for law enforcement and border control, as fascists. What they're trying to do is say that anyone who criticizes the immigration policies when it comes to its mass deportation efforts, its anti-immigrant policies, that these are foundational American principles, and if you're criticizing them as quote-unquote fascists, then you're basically, there's some reason to believe you're going to be more inclined to commit an act of terrorism or encourage an act for violent revolution, right? And so that's a big problem, right? I mean, if you think about it today, Ryan, more than half the public is critical of Trump's anti-immigrant policies, including his mass deportation efforts. But when you look at this memo, what you see is the very next lines, then connect that
Can I
to the
actually just
idea.
jump in, Tom?
Yeah, please do. Stop me from talking.
No. All of that's great information analysis. I just want to piggyback on it to add a couple more points right where you are. One, that language in NSPM-7 just looks like First Amendment activity, First Amendment political expressions. Even if somebody holds the most extremist of those views, that is still just a view, and that's their constitutional right. So when NSPM-7 came out, folks like you and I, close observers, were already worried as to how it might be utilized.
Yeah.
Second, just want to double down on something you said, which is there are so many Americans who disagree with the methods by which this administration is carrying out immigration enforcement, and they might well even analogize it to fascist policies. That includes, in the last few days, Joe Rogan, right? So Joe Rogan is not just holding those views, he's even expressing those views. You might even think if he weren't Joe Rogan, it would put him in the crosshairs of NSPM-7. He just recently said, quote, "You don't want militarized people in the streets just roaming around, snatching people up, many of which turn out to actually be U.S. citizens that just don't have their papers on them. Are we really going to be the Gestapo?"
You don't want militarized people in the streets just roaming around, snatching people up, many of which turn out to actually be U.S. citizens that just don't have their papers on them. Are we really going to be the Gestapo? Where's your papers? Is that what we've come to? I'm not that guy. I don't know what he thought. And again, this is a guy who had almost been run over, but it just looked horrific to me. I mean, when people say it's justifiable because the car hit him, it seemed like she was kind of turning the car away.
He's actually even drawing the direct analogy to fascism, and NSPM-7 doesn't even need that direct and explicit a connection. So that just to lay the groundwork of how amorphous and open-ended this kind of dragnet is, that was always latent in NSPM-7, and now we might actually be seeing its actual implementation, operationalization. So back to you.
Well, I mean, it's all completely correct. I agree with all that. I mean, the other thing is, think about it for a second. I mean, John Kelly, who was chief of staff during the first Trump administration, he said that Trump is a fascist.
Right.
So is he now, a threat for political violence or a looming domestic terrorist threat? I mean, it's ludicrous, right? But that's what they want to do. They want to demonize speech, and the connecting that what they were trying to do with Renee Good, and you could even. I don't, but you could even fault her actions there, okay, and say that she made some mistakes prior to that shooting. I don't make those arguments. I'm just saying you could make those, right? And still realize it's ludicrous to compare her to a domestic terrorist or call her a domestic terrorist, right? The idea that this woman, a mother, is in a Honda Pilot with toys hanging out of the glove box is now to be considered the same thing as Timothy McVeigh, a right winger who blew up the Murray buildings in Oklahoma City in 1995, or, one of these other hardcore, neo-Nazis who commits a mass shooting somewhere in the name of the Great Replacement theory. The idea that that's all the same thing now, right? That domestic terrorists or anybody who even criticizes the administration or opposes its policies, that's not even a slippery slope, right? You're going all the way down the slope, right? You're going right off the edge of the mountain. And there's a couple other things, and obviously stop me from going on and on, but I'll just highlight a couple other things in this paragraph here, Ryan, that I think people should be aware about. The next line actually inverts the reality here, right? This administration has really sought to undermine basic constitutional rights. This is another video for another time, whether it be First Amendment rights, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, 14th Amendment. You can go through amendment by amendment. But they're trying to portray anybody who criticizes them as fascists for doing this, the anti-fascist lie, they call it. They say that's become an organizing rally cry used by domestic terrorists to wage a violent assault against democratic institutions, constitutional rights, and fundamental American liberties. So you see what they've done there? They've inverted basically the whole thing, even as this administration is actually undermining civil liberties and American rights, right? They're going to say that the people who are opposed to them for doing that and call them fascists for doing that, they're the ones who are trying to undermine constitutional rights. It's a real Orwellian inversion of reality. And then the next line, just to your point, Ryan, I mean, and this is where it really, we talk about commonly held beliefs. Think about this now. The next line really hits at this. It says, common threads animating this violent conduct include anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, and anti-Christianity, support for the overthrow of the United States government, extremism on migration, race, and gender, and hostility towards those who hold traditional American views of family, religion, and morality. Wow. That is a loaded sentence, right? That is basically portraying a whole range of center-left views and even some like mildly center-right views, quite frankly, or even libertarian right views. There's a whole range of views there that could be construed as now indicative and indicia of political violence or the threat of political violence when these views are commonly held by a lot of Americans, I mean, the whole idea that you have an extremism on migration. See, that's connecting it back to immigration again, right? That phrase. It's connecting it back to the idea that if you are criticizing their anti-immigrant policies, you're somehow a threat.
Yeah, and that seems to be the way in which they are trying to frame Renee Good, the victim of this tragic event. And it's not as though Kristi Noem just said it once. She then doubles down in another press conference. And we started this conversation with the interview with Jake Tapper, and then he presses her on it, and she triples down on the idea that Renee Good is a part of a domestic terror network.
Standing by the comments that she made immediately after the shooting of Renee Good by an ICE agent in Minneapolis, Noem insisting today on CNN that her domestic terrorism claims against Good were not a rush to judgment. On the day of the shooting, Noem held a press conference where she said Good refused to obey the ICE officer's demands and then weaponized her vehicle in an effort to run the ICE agent over. But videos that have since been released call that narrative into question. And today, Noem repeatedly insisted her version of events is the right one, and she refused to acknowledge the possibility that Good could have been peacefully trying to flee the scene.
How can you assert with certainty that she was trying to hurt the officer as opposed to she was trying to flee the scene.
If you look at what the definition of domestic terrorism is, it completely fits the situation on the ground.
And I think this is important for everybody to understand, because while we're seeing whether or not it does connect the dots, it is important that the conversation be informed by the concerns and analysis that's gone into NSPM-7, because of the ways in which that can be operationalized, even if there is no domestic legislation naming any organization as a domestic terror group. So I think with that, we've kind of given it our all, but if there's any other parting thoughts that you have, Tom.
One other quick thing I'll say to you. So I think people should read this for themselves, particularly the paragraph we're talking about, to see how broad and sweeping this is and how it is a threat to the First Amendment. The other thing about NSPM-7 is it tries to define acts of terrorism to include things like doxing, which is revealing people's public information, and even trespassing. So now they're trying to, not only are they trying to broadly define a whole huge swath of the American public as potentially a source of political violence and domestic terrorism, they're also saying that just very basic acts, which you could disagree with, of course, and could be criminal in many cases, but have certainly not been defined as terrorism. I mean, trespassing is not really considered a terrorist act in and of itself. There has to be something else involved in it. But that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to open this broad sort of swath of activities now, even. So broad swath of views and activities, and put it all together as domestic terrorism.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you.